Okay, that works. I think there should be a word for the phenomenon where white people obsess about every culture except their own. This phenomenon is especially abundant on the social media platform that we all know and love, TikTok. And here we've especially seen an abundance of this happen. White people overly indulge themselves, usually in like a really obsessive, fetishizy, creepy, racist way in East Asian culture, which happens a lot. Happens to the point where the concept of like ricta evolved, or race change to another, or CTA, whatever you want to call it.
No one ever saw me cry until I left the party the other night. Do you remember all the things that you said to me?
And there's nothing wrong with, like, at its core, appreciating things that were created outside of your cultural sphere. But, big buts, where it becomes problematic is when you let those things influence and form your opinions on that culture, and you like boil it down to all the good parts of that culture, so you can like take advantage of it and make it your own thing without acknowledging the rest of the culture. It's a little weird. You're basically boiling that culture down to very harmful stereotypes, but painting it in a way that's like fun and quirky to you. Although I could make a whole video about how TikTok is like the locus of weird romanticizing, fetishizing things about other cultures, I'm gonna limit myself to use it for only the intro of this video. Another horrible set of trends on TikTok, out of many, is people making short form aesthetic content of other cultures, people, places, including, but not limited to, Slavic countries like Poland and Russia, where people would like use the term Russia core or like Slavic girl core, all because one band, Molchat Doma, got popular on there. Japan is another one where people were just, you know, like I mentioned, the whole ricta thing, remember that? Includes Japan. And they also make these like weird little like aesthetic compilations of Japan, convincing you to move there without really talking about, you know, the racism and the sexism and like everything else. They're just like, yeah, this place is really cute and fun. It's a place full of social complexities, let's remember that. And if all that wasn't bad enough, Brazilians have been dragged into this too, and we just want to stay out of it. We are so tired. Let us breathe. We're dragged into this in the form of this meme, the Brazil PR team memes.
Vem me dar vácuo, vácuo, me leva pro teu barraco, raco, raco, raco. Vem me dar vácuo, vácuo, me leva pro teu barraco, raco, raco, raco.
Brasil!
And montages of like wealthy Brazilian neighborhoods and beaches, and people are like, oh, this is a great vacation spot, this is so underground. Like, did you guys not know about Brazil before? Like, were we underground or something? Like, thanks.
So I'm in northeastern Brazil right now with my family, and it's literally monsoon season, so let me just show you. Our roof, it literally caved in. These collect the water dripping from our roof for the past 2 weeks. And my uncle had to reroute literally all of the electricity in the house, so that's that. Here's all our clothes stretched out, and here is the little bowl of food and water that I leave for the random cats along the neighborhood. Love, maybe tomorrow I will show you the beach.
My point being, the dismissal of poverty and the dismissal of like the prevalence of social inequality and major social issues is the root injustice found across all types of media not only TikTok, but also in film. Speaking of movies, that's right, I'm doing a 180. I recently watched 2 movies that explain this dichotomy really well of like, what is the difference between cultural appreciation and appropriation, or just being weird and fetishizy? One is Heroi, and the other is, I don't even remember the name of it, what was it? Orfeu Negro or Black Orpheus. I really, really like one of them, and I hate the other one. Can you tell which is which? Set within the lively cultural framework of Brazil, Orfeu Negro, directed by Marcel Camus in, I believe, 1959, unifies the classic Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, Orpheus, the myth, with vibrancy, juxtaposing thematic structures against one another. You have a really depressing story in 1950 Rio when Carnival was going on. Super fun, super sad. To sum it up, if you don't know, the myth of Orpheus is about Orpheus, obviously, who is like the world's greatest poet and musician of all time. He's like the it guy. He then marries this nymph named Eurydice. Her name is Eurydice, not Eurydice. Don't know what I said before. He marries a nymph, Eurydice, who's very characterized by, if you know anything about women in myth, she's characterized by her beauty, her physical appearance. She's the most beautiful woman there ever was. She becomes like the pinnacle of the damsel in distress trope. She's just pretty, basically brainless, very just woman in myth. They get married. They live happily ever after. Just kidding, no they don't. She's then attacked by Aristeus, some like lower god. She runs away into the woods because she's scared, gets bitten by a venomous snake, then dies. Orpheus, who knew her for like 2 days, super depressed, super sad. He's like, there's no point in living if I don't have my most beautiful nymph wife with me. So he travels to the underworld to convince the rulers to give her back, and they're like, you know what, buddy? You're a great musician, you're a great poet, we'll do it. Only if, when you bring her back, you don't look at her or speak to her the whole journey through the underworld. So guess what he doesn't do? That. He looks at her, he talks to her, she gets sucked back into the underworld, and he's like, oh my god, I'm never gonna see her again. That's the whole myth. There's no happy ending. It's a Greek tragedy. So the film itself, retelling this myth, beautifully shot. It is such a beautiful movie. I think the colors, the costume design, the set design is beautiful. It is such like a vibrant film to watch. Even though I hate the plot and I hate everything about it, the physical visual aspect of it is amazing. It's able to exude this sense of mystery and intrigue and fantasy, and it's so vibrant and fun and beautiful, and it introduces these questions of reincarnation without answering them. Like, there's this one scene where Orpheus hints at knowing Eurydice in a past life, and she remembers him, but they never bring it up again, and the inescapable threat of fate. Like, they're fated to have been in the situation because it happened before and it will happen again if they've been reincarnated. It's like, it's really just mystical and sad. So it should be really good, right? Camus utilizes various tropes, symbols, music to unify Brazilian culture and daily life into like classic Greek myth. You know, one of my favorite scene of this actually is there is a little church ritual space where Kombolji, I think is how I pronounce it, Kombolji is being practiced, which is this West African religion that was banned at this time in Brazil. In that church, Eurydice's soul spirit is kind of being kept because this is when she died, and Orpheus has to go find her, right? He has to go find her, travel through the underworld, save her, and bring her back. Outside of the church, there's this dog who just kind of guards it. And I think that's really cool because it's just like a random stray dog that's in the courtyard of the church, and I think that he acts as Cerberus, right? Like the gatekeeper of the underworld, which, by the way, why is the only West African religion in this movie supposed to represent the underworld and be scary? And like, the film was widely celebrated for introducing bossa nova into the US because the film was very successful here. It was also celebrated, at least in recent years, for using an all-black cast, which is a very unexplored concept for its time. Winning the Palme d'Or and the Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars, it's clear that audiences around the world loved this movie. All I'm gonna say is Camus is lucky he never got to meet me, because I have some words for this man about this movie. Like I said before, Camus was considered a pioneer for introducing bossa nova into the US music scene. And like, think about that for a second. A European guy is attributed with introducing Brazilian music that fuses samba and funk together to a foreign land. Make it make sense. So use of the cuica drum and the portrayal of samba pretty much just aided Camus' desire to add like a level of spice and exoticism to his retelling. And his use of anapathetic dissonance with bossa nova pretty much just contributes to the film's very eerie but like mystical sense, which can be good, can also be pretty bad. Although a very technically and visually pleasing film, I think that there are many negative sociopolitical layers to it, if that wasn't clear already. Bossa nova used to be acquainted with retaliation, rebellion, resistance. The genre was created amidst the Brazilian military dictatorship. It was supposed to capture the sound of resistance. It was supposed to be like a form of protest. And the film's appraisal of exotic music pretty much just ruined that whole thing. And it convinced white people to steal it. What a surprise. Now bossa nova is a part of MPB, which is popular Brazilian music. It's a genre that a lot of people see as snobby, as like for the high class. It's not really accessible. All black history within that genre has been erased. Like, there are not many popular black singers or artists that can partake in bossa nova because it's just a mostly white dominated genre, dominated by white Brazilians, but also foreign audiences and white Americans. This erasure of black voices in the bossa nova genre is what forced the Tropicalia movement to be born. It's, you know, it was a movement to kind of suppress or to oppose bossa nova's claim of being an all-encompassing genre. Basically, if you're gonna thank Camus for introducing bossa nova to the US, you're also gonna have to thank him for erasing black voices from the genre as well. And also thank him because of him, Obama was born? Let that sink in. My qualms with the film are very much related to my grievances with contemporary anthropology and anthropology as a whole. I am an anthropologist, by the way. White people are so fascinated by the lives of the other, and their neocolonial mindsets kind of just convince them to like go ahead and study it without really any consideration for like the individuals of that culture. And Camus is not an exception to this. The whole movie is just a white French director who's fascinated by poor Brazilian people and wants to paint it out as palpable to rich foreign audiences. He takes you on a trip to the Morro de Babilônia, which is the favela, the slums that the people in Orfeu Negro live in. While he does this, he misrepresents their lives, but is somehow able to accurately portray like Greek tropes. Remember the Cerberus, the dog I talked about? That's a really cool, like, intricate callback to Greek mythology, yet the Afro-Brazilian religion that is being practiced in that same scene is kind of painted as off-putting and scary, and it's the underworld. Right? Like, what does that mean? Unfortunately, it's a theme seen time and time again from white people. The entirety of the film, in my opinion, is just a piece of ethnocentric media that was made for consumption rather than celebration of a culture. And the use of an all-black cast initially was a really, really pleasant surprise. It was great to see, but at the end of the movie, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. Like, it just kind of seemed like another cog in his goal to romanticize not only Brazilian lives, but the black body. Why is Orpheus, like, shirtless all the time? All the women swoon for him. Yes, he's a musician and a poet, and it's great that, you know, that is what the myth kind of shows, but, like, why did so many people watch this movie and then immediately were like, oh, black people are cute too? Like, it's just kind of weird. Like, it just did not come across as a celebration of, like, black Afro-Brazilian and black culture and life, but it just kind of came off as, like, again, a little level of spice and exoticism to his movie. Although a brilliant director, it just felt like Marcel Camus used Brazil the same way that kind of people on TikTok now are seeing Brazil for the first time. It seemed like he discovered it and was like, hold on, new place unlocked, let me make a movie about it. The reality of living in a Brazilian slum cannot be equated to constant dancing. Like, genuinely the most dancing I've seen in a movie ever in my life. Through mostly static camera work, except during that one scene where Eurydice is being chased in this, like, underground bunker thing with, like, a red light flickering over them, and the perpetuation of the damsel in distress trope. Orfeu Negro's plot is really just a paternalistic spin on the myth of Orpheus, illustrating portrayal of a picturesque life in a Brazilian slum through constant dance and music. I cannot stress that enough. Camus sustains the bourgeois, like, view of poor people life to make it more entertaining, to make it easier to consume, and it's all through tedious camera work and very underdeveloped characters. Or maybe I just don't like films from the 50s. Maybe I just don't like films from the 50s. We can finally talk about something good. Before I talk about the plot of the film and my thoughts on it, I did want to just give you my initial impression of it based on the opening sequence. The first 2.5 minutes gave me the impression that Zezé Gamboa, the director, was gonna give you kind of a bleak perspective on adolescent life in Angola, Luanda specifically, which is the capital. The film opens with this flyby shot of the city, where the background soundtrack is like children humming or laughing paired with slow humming. It's children laughing and slow humming. A little off-putting, a little eerie, and a little uncomfortable. But that is kind of the tone of the movie. This was then kind of confirmed when the camera pans in on this group of boys playing basketball together, kind of supporting the calm before the storm narrative. The immediate cut from children playing to a disabled soldier wandering the streets of Luanda forces a very sad perspective on the viewer. Also, did you hear the director's name? Zezé Gamboa. It's not a white guy, it's not a European. It's an Angolan director making a movie about Angola. Finally. Anyway, the movie follows Vitório, whose name means victory in English, which is kind of ironic and kind of depressing because he's anything but victorious in the movie, who's facing homelessness, while the B plot focuses on Manu. Remember the kids playing basketball in the beginning? Who wants to discover who his dad is after his dad was drafted and disappeared in the war. Lusophone African cinema is widely unknown in the international film industry. It's just kind of not really thought about, which is really sad. And that means that a lot of African cinema that is produced has to kind of be an international project. This movie specifically, Heroi, was a tri-national production. Angola worked on it, obviously. Actually, it was 4 nations that helped, or that worked on it. Angola, France, Portugal, and Brazil. What stands out to you there? Portugal and France kind of just helped in this film production because they're the colonizers. They want to be in the middle of everything. Brazil, on the other hand, also colonized by Portugal, has been aiming to work with other Lusophone countries due to a common goal. They're both colonized. They both don't really, at least from the Brazil perspective, don't really know their culture. They don't know where they came from because of slavery, because of the mass displacement of people in Brazil, right? History was lost, voices were lost, and so a lot of Brazilian industries strive to work with other lusophone countries to rebuild that connection. Instead of hiding behind the facade of fantasy to create a dream of the lives of the poor, in my opinion, to make the rich think the poor are just fine, Gamboa explores the harsh realities of those in the slums with scenes of water and electricity shortages, gang violence, unemployment, homelessness, and labor disputes. So at face value, the film does seem really depressing, really bleak, and it seems to emphasize a sense of hopelessness for the lives of Angolan people. But Gamboa does shed light on hope for the future. The Angolan Civil War was the root cause of displacement over the course of several years. Yet Gamboa gives hope for reunitement and other forms of unity by creating new connections. Some of the connections described by Gamboa come directly from the displacement that many people face from either serving in the war themselves or losing family members in it, especially young people. Young people typically gravitate towards large city centers, much like Luanda, due to the financial accessibility of the musecas, which are basically the favelas of Angola, the slums of Angola. In order to survive, these young people create these pseudo-families by forming gangs. Much like the group we saw Manu in at the beginning playing basketball. They make their money by petty crimes, and they find this sense of pride and unity and community, solidarity, by creating rival gangs, by having beef with rival gangs. They have a common enemy together. Post-combatants as well as day-to-day civilians struggle in the state of post-colonial Angola, especially within the capital Luanda. Having lost his leg in combat, Vitório seeks state-sanctioned medical help to get a prosthetic leg. After days of camping outside of the hospital and being sassed by this guy, Vitório was finally able to connect with a doctor who gives him his prosthetic. What soon follows is this scene of Vitório entering the physical therapy room, where the background sounds consist of heavy machinery and clinking, while injured soldiers work on the equipment. The entire scene could basically boil down to, in my opinion, a metaphor for the victims of the Angolan Civil War as the backbone of Angola's Industrial Revolution. Most of my experience with healthcare does come from American healthcare, but I am cynical about it because of my experience with American healthcare and also my little experience with Brazilian healthcare. My first reaction to the lack of medical guidance and the difficulty Vitório faces getting an appointment with the doctor was to question why there was no talk of follow-up and why physical therapy wasn't even mentioned when he was talking to the doctor. My second reaction was realizing that this is the reality that a lot of countries face, especially in countries like Brazil and Angola, and to some extent in the US as well. Accurate medical care is only accessible to the wealthy, especially when one is a victim to the capital interests of a corporation. Vitório isn't given any of the aforementioned medical assistance because he's not deemed a valued member of society, especially now that he's disabled. His worth is linked to the labor output that he can produce. The assistance that he's looking for are luxuries and unfortunately are not human rights. His position as a sergeant should not be the thing that marks him as valuable, but rather it should be the fact that he's a living, breathing person. Like I said, at face value, Heroi can come across as a very bleak movie, but if you dig a little deeper, the ending completely shatters his narrative. Oh my god. I forgot to talk about Jiu-Jitsu. Remember in the beginning when I mentioned the whole thing about labor disputes? Okay, keep that in mind. This girl, Jiu-Jitsu, she's a teacher at the school that is currently going on a strike because the teachers are not getting paid enough. So, she and Manu have this very kind of like a mother-daughter relationship. She wants him to work, she wants him to study, she wants him to grow in this really, really harsh environment that he's in. He sees her as this kind of support system, as someone to look up to, but she is also wealthy, right? She comes from a family that supports one side of the Angolan civil movement that's backed by Portugal. So although Jiu-Jitsu kind of seems like the enemy, she kind of seems like she would support the wrong side of the movement, nothing is entirely good or evil. She understands the nuances of the conflict, she understands the nuances of the effects of the war, and she acts as a mother to Manu. She ends up meeting Vitório, and they become this little pseudo family. I don't know if I mentioned, but we thought his prosthetic leg gets stolen, right? And he is kind of demasculated. He's been demasculated in the sense of his leg already getting cut off. He's demasculated in the sense of being homeless, not being able to provide, not being able to like find a woman. Yet he finds it in the end. He gets it back. He meets Jujic, and he has Manu, who kind of acts as like an adoptive son to him. I found this article by Bonnie Wasserman, I think is how you pronounce her name, and I think that she encapsulates my opinion of the movie really, really well when she says, Heroi draws from transnational sources and themes and provides a realistic view of life in a society that is coming to terms with years of brutal conflict. The harsh reality of veterans living in a post-war environment where they are not valued nor given the care they need is brought to light. Both men and women suffer in war. Men through the symbolic castration of being amputees, and women being reduced to using their bodies to make a living. Children, most of all, must live with the unknown of where their parents are and deal with finding dangerous pseudo-families amongst gangs on the street. There is hope, however, in the end, as Uthaudio finally does receive his stolen prosthetic leg, and a new, albeit somewhat forced family is formed between him and Jujic. So, I think that the movie, unlike a big, bold and underlined unlike Orfeu Negro, is able to create a really compelling and bittersweet narrative in a really horrible context. And I think that although Orfeu Negro is widely different, you know, I mean, Heroi was made in 2004, probably filmed in 2003, 2002, whereas Orfeu Negro was released in 1959, very different political contexts, very different times. I think that at its core, film is supposed to be a message that you give to your audience, right? There are very different messages there. I think that Camus just used Brazil as some spice, as some like fantastical, like fetishizing item, right, to package and sell to rich foreigners, whereas Gamboa uses his personal experience in Angola in the Civil War to show that there are two sides, and not necessarily good and evil, but two sides of, one is the political side and one is the individual side of things. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful movie. I think both are visually beautiful movies. One is just physically beautiful and the other one is physically beautiful and internally beautiful. So those are my thoughts on the two movies and how I think they have very, very different messages. And I think that, if anything, this video serves as an appreciation for lusophone cinema regardless of the director. I think that both movies do good jobs at some things and one of them does a horrible job at other things. But I did appreciate both of them very much. I enjoyed watching them, although I did have to pause multiple times during both of them to just kind of contain my feelings. And they are both worth the watch. I think that, you know, Orfeu Negro is worth the watch because, I mean, it is a good introductory film into Brazilian culture if you're unfamiliar with Carnaval, with the way that things are in favelas. Like, I think it is great. But I think other movies to consider watching if you want to know more about the day-to-day life of Brazilians are The Way He Looks, which is a very great coming-of-age story. It's about adolescence, it's about coming out, it's about disability, it's just a beautiful movie. It's tear-jerking, it's shot amazingly, the soundtrack is one of my favorites that I've ever heard. I think Tropa de Elite is definitely worth the watch. I think that if you're squeamish, don't watch it, but I think that the first one is way better than the second. And I also think that City of God is, like, it should be in everyone's top 10, honestly. Also, I do have to say, this was a project for school, so sorry if I sound weird, overly professional, and looking at my screen reading from a script, but I will make more videos like this. I think I really, really enjoyed it. It was super fun, and if my professor is seeing this on YouTube, please give me an A.